Welcome everyone to our live stream today. It's nice to see you all here. And today we've got a very interesting subject. While we've put the words mental health out there, it's not a very tiny subject at all. It's quite enormous. So today we're going to make a start on looking at the subject of mental health. Now, you're not going to just listen to me talking about mental health. It's so much better having somebody who is so much more informed. So let's bring on Jonam and have a chat with him. How are you today, Jonam?
Splendid. It's wonderful over here in the UK. How are you?
I'm doing good, my friend. I'm in a different place today. I'm about 7 hours away from where I normally am. I'm in Auckland, the biggest city of the country, and where I am right now, we're having a meetup. So I just had to excuse myself, and so I'm glad to be here with you and everybody else.
Yeah,
so
good to be back.
It's nice to have. It is. It's great to have you back. So mental health, we know it's a huge subject. Do you find people are struggling with mental health?
Yes, is a short answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's like gravity. You know, there's this force that's constantly kind of pulling us down towards the ground physically. And if we navigate it well, we can get through life okay. And if we don't navigate it well, we go crashing down and we bruise ourselves. So it's whoever you are and whatever you're going through in life, there is entropy at play. There are, life's going to throw curveballs. There are things that can come up that threaten to destabilize us or overwhelm us. That's a given. But if we're not able to navigate that right, then we end up suffering. So, yeah.
Is there a short answer on how to handle it? Our mental health?
I mean, an hour is quite a short answer, but I'll try my best. Specifically, a lot of the challenges with mental health, if we're talking about things that aren't like specific biochemical genetic problems, right? So we're talking about the other like 95 to 99% of problems, right? So with these things, a lot of it comes down to things like overwhelm. And that can be overwhelm with what's currently happening in our life. It can be overwhelm about the future, which is what we call anxiety. Or it can be overwhelm about the past and things that have happened before, which we tend to call depression or sadness. And so learning how to take back control of our minds, of our lives, so that then we are the ones in the driving seat, as it were, rather than feeling like our mind is happening to us. We have negative voices in our heads that are talking badly to us, bad feelings that are happening to us. Like when we feel like the victims of our own mind, then how can you move through the world in an empowered way? So it's finding the ways to get back into the driving seat and take back control. Now that's what we need to do. That's the short answer. The how part is really the part where it becomes longer. Yeah.
So if we're in the situation where we are struggling with our mental health, what could be a good first step for us to get that under or start getting it under control?
Yeah. So when I was going through the training with applied behavior research, when I was training to be one of the tactical behavior trainers and all of this, there are a lot of details in, influential linguistics and all this intricate stuff. What's interesting is that at the core of the most powerful communication, most powerful influence is your ability to influence yourself. And so more than anything else was emphasized, you need to have control over your own life, over your own mind.
Yep.
And you can divide that down specifically into a few important areas in terms of the outside world of our physical lives. And it's in this order, it's in a specific order. There's the environment, so where you are, like your bedroom, what state is your desk that you're working from day to day, things like that. There's your time and being on top of the time management aspect. There's our health and our appearance. Then there's our social circle. And then there's our finances. So when you divide life into those 5 categories, there's more to life, obviously. But by starting, if you're feeling that things are kind of coming untethered or that you're being ungrounded, starting with something simple like looking around at your environment and saying, can I at least get in control of this? And maybe you're in a situation where if say if you're living at home with you're surrounded by JW relatives, for instance, some people are. Well, the only thing you might have control of is your own bedroom or a cupboard in your bedroom. And that's not ideal, but that's what you have control over. So is what you do have control over as good as you can make it? And so by just starting like that and chunking it down and saying, well, I'll make some progress here, it actually makes you feel better and it gives you a victory. The same with your time. You're gradually clawing back control and authority over your own self, over your own life, and taking those small steps. It's not glamorous, right? And this is one of the problems, is that in especially the kind of modern, very self-helpy kind of culture, it's like, well, wave magic wands and say affirmations and everything transforms overnight. And the truth is rarely that glamorous. The truth is usually it's incremental change. So we need the humility to set small goals. And by working through that little checklist and saying, well, what's my environment like? Am I taking care of it as well as I could? Once you start doing that, then you gain some mental space as well. There's a part of our minds that I might end up mentioning later that's it's job to remind us and bug us when something isn't done, when we've left something unfinished. And so if we can complete and take that control of as much as possible, then that frees up this mental energy so that then the other problems that we have to deal with, we've got more energy to then address them with.
Okay. So there's no one magic bullet to fix all of this.
No, and anyone who says there is probably selling you snake oil. There are things that we can do that are very effective and very good. Obviously, I'm a hypnotherapist, so I'm a big fan of hypnotherapy. Gets amazing results. But there's, like we were saying before we jumped on the live, is that there's a big puzzle to be figured out in life, and everyone's got a different piece of the puzzle. NLP, great resources. Somatic trauma release exercises, fantastic. The psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, super useful, and it all comes together to make a complete picture. I think the importance is, rather than being overwhelmed with trying to solve the entire problem at once, is to chunk it down. Like I mentioned at the beginning, overwhelm is a big thing. And what tends to happen, let's say if I'm struggling with grief, for instance, so I've lost my family, I've lost all my friends, I've lost my support network. Grieving is a big thing we have to do. Because we've lost so much in such a short space of time, we can feel the pressure to recover from all of it as quickly as we got over it. As quickly as we lost it. And that's just not doable. But because we've mentally, I'm working around this new microphone, I don't know how to gesture. Because without sending massive bangs into your earphones. Anyway, because we've mentally categorized it in this kind of pigeonhole of grief associated with the organization and everything I've lost there. It's this huge weight. And as a result, if we then even think about trying to solve that, it's pretty overwhelming because it's just too much to wrap our head around. That's why it's so cruel. The trick I've found to be very helpful, and I've seen this with clients and with other people, friends in this community as well, is when you take the pressure off yourself to try and miraculously do everything in one go. And give yourself permission to chunk it down and say, okay, in this category of grief, for instance, there are quite a few people who I'm missing. And you could say that there's grievances, which is people I've got issues with. And then there are people who I'm grieving, which is the people I don't have an issue with, but I really miss. And so then within those categories, you have the different individuals. And so then what you can do is you can begin to say, well, I give the rest of this big ball of grief, I give that permission to stay for now. I'm not going to fight against all of that. I just give that permission to be. I'm going to focus on this one person and my feelings about this one person and work through the grief of that one relationship. And then you make progress there. Now, the irony is that by just focusing on that one and processing the grief around that one relationship, there tends to be a ripple effect that goes outwards. So the progress you make isn't just in that one area. Because one of the things that your mind does is it generalizes. It does three things. It deletes, it distorts, and it generalizes. So we delete information that doesn't match what we believe. We distort things into kind of matching what we believe. And we generalize out. So we'll take one thing, take one experience, like I tried a romantic relationship and it was really painful, so love isn't for me. You know, we'll take those things and generalize it out. The same thing happens when we make these steps of progress, when we learn these lessons. So then as you heal from the grief of losing that one person, there will be lessons and distinctions that you learn in that process that generalize out into the other relationships. Unconsciously, you don't have to work at that. But it's giving yourself permission to chunk it down into the kind of bite sizes that you can reasonably do, and then giving yourself permission to feel what you feel.
So if one was to do that, what are some of the things or the chunks that we can break it down to make it small, work on it? What are some of those things we can do?
It depends on the context. So the one I just outlined was grief. There can be many different causes of mental unrest, let's say.
Okay.
And so I would say choose the category of things, whatever feels like it's getting on top of you, and then break it down to the most manageable chunk size. And so what I mean by that is what feels manageable to you. There's no one answer to that because everyone's unique, but it's what's actually manageable. If you're trying to solve the whole problem at once, then it's too much. If you chunk it down too small, then all the little details can get overwhelming. So let's say in the area of physical health, for instance, because that's important. That's a part. Our body and our mind are this symbiotic relationship. So taking care of our physical health, well, dealing with all of it at one go, so going to the gym, going running, exercising, changing your diet, everything, you can end up in a healing crisis. If you're not in a position to have the space for that, then that's too much. So you might start by saying, well, the first thing I'm going to do is drink 2 big bottles of water every day. And that's it. That's my goal for the next 21 days, for instance, to drink the right amount of water every day until that becomes a habit.
So 21 days, is that the habit forming period?
That's what they say.
Okay.
That's what they say. Opinions vary, but they say 21 days. You can also say 21 really good repetitions. With a daily habit, 21 repetitions is 21 days.
Okay. Okay, so that in grief, is that the same for every aspect of our life, to break it down to chunks that are manageable for us?
It's a good rule of thumb, because when we have the ultimate goal, right, which is to work through what we need to work through, to be free from the tyranny of the past, as it were, and then to be able to move forward into the future, feeling confident, feeling resourceful. So that's the ultimate goal we're working towards, is to kind of get over the top of that ridge so you can then see into the future just fine. Obviously, if you try and like leapfrog there and teleport, you're probably going to hurt yourself. So taking it on that step-by-step level, as cliche as it sounds, but just giving yourself permission to be where you are and to grow at the rates that you're ready to grow, while also not leaving it to chance either. That's the kind of overview philosophical approach that seems to be the most helpful for people.
Okay, cool. So after we've started to work on those little chunks, do we move on to the next one after the 21 days when it's into the habit forming stage?
Yeah, it's so when I work with people one-on-one, we can kind of tailor this very, very specifically. But as a good rule of thumb is that when you feel ready, and a large part of this is about listening to yourself. And that's one of the things that we got trained not to do. We got trained to alienate ourselves from ourselves, so that my own intuition, my own knowledge of what I need and what I want and all of this was disregarded. So training yourself, that's one of the habits to improve, is learning to listen to yourself. So you know when something's resolved versus when there's still something hanging on.
So what are you exactly meaning to, get out of the training that a lot of us were part of, to move on and recognize in ourselves? How does that work?
So getting the kind of religious indoctrination and the old...
moving that out the way.
Yeah.
And then starting to listen and feel the way that we do, so we can take that next step.
Yeah. So again, because that's something that we were forcibly underdeveloped in, right?
Yes.
Like you imagine someone who's never ever been allowed to use their arms to lift anything heavier than a cup. Their arms and their shoulders are going to be weak. And so what you then need to do is you need to strengthen it up gradually. Like physical therapy, if someone's rehabilitating after a physical injury, after physical trauma, it's the same here. That's why I've called the project Religion Rehab, is because we are rehabilitating. Excuse me. And you have to take it at the pace that's right for the individual. So in the case of listening to yourself, you can do things. I think I've left my notebook downstairs. You can get a little notebook. And this is something I recommend to people, is just set a timer on your phone for 2 or 3 occasions throughout the day. So it just goes off regularly. And at that time, you have to open your notebook and just write down how you're feeling. Good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. And just a word, like frustrated, happy, curious, fascinated, whatever it is. But give it a label and just explain a little bit of the context.
Yeah.
And as simple as this sounds, what you can then do is, over time, you're building this habit of tuning into yourself and saying, well, how am I actually feeling right now? And what's the context around that? Because what often happens when we're in a situation like a cult or a narcissistic relationship even, we're forced into a situation where we're not allowed to listen to our own feelings.
Yes.
And so then we completely bottle it up, we completely insulate ourselves from it. And then afterwards we come out of it and it's like, oh my gosh, what was going on there? So we need to reestablish that line of communication so that then our emotions and our thoughts can inform us in real time rather than in retrospect.
Yep.
Yeah. And as small and bite-sized as that sounds, by building that internal awareness, that then helps us to reclaim our internal world. I talk about how our job is to reclaim our own minds as our own sovereign territory. And, it has been occupied territory for a long time. So piece by piece, we gain that back. And this is one of the ways that we do that, is by learning to communicate with our own selves and to listen to our own selves as well.
So we're allowed to do that, are we? Just asking.
You have full permission.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, you just got to laugh at some of the things there.
Pink-faced man from the UK is given full permission over here. Fill your boots.
What, have you been in the sun today or so? Oh, no, you haven't really got the sun yet. Okay, so that's a nice, practical, simple step, isn't it? Just to get a notebook down or in front of you, write. We can set the alarm on our phone. How are we feeling? Write it down.
Yeah, as simple as that sounds, what I said before about how our mind generalizes out. So taking that skill, then what this means is that if you're in a situation where someone's maybe trying to get you to agree to something, let's say taking on more work than you're able to take on. And previously you would have just said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then you end up being overwhelmed. Then you end up being really stressed, not sleeping right. So, you're not rested. You end up even more stressed, creates this downward spiral. Instead, in that situation, because you've done the kind of wax on, wax off Karate Kid exercise of just checking in with yourself, when that request is being made, you'll get a feeling of, oh, this is probably a bad idea. You'll be aware of that feeling. You'll know how to tune into it and say, well, what am I feeling and why? And then you'll be able to verbalize it as well, because you've been practicing all of those skills. So then in that situation, instead of flying off the handle at your boss or your client, which is a bad thing, and instead of being overwhelmed and just agreeing to stuff that's going to make you burn out, you can navigate that kind of situation elegantly because you've built up this track record within yourself of the very simple skill of self-awareness. Yeah. So it's like I say, that's one of those things that's not glamorous, but it makes a huge difference when you actually go ahead and do it.
Okay, we just had a question come in, and hopefully I will be able to read it. Or can you see it?
Mm-hmm. So what are some practical steps we can take to work through the grief of losing someone you love?
So that's going back a little bit, but I didn't see it until just now.
No, it's a great question. So one of the fascinating and sad things is that the grief that we feel for the friends and family that we lose is unnatural. Now, there is a type of grief that's natural. We like when people die and we lose them in death.
Yeah,
we can wrap our heads around that, and it's still horrible, and we still have denial and anger and all of those different things. But we can wrap our heads around it because we've seen it happen everywhere. It happens all throughout nature, all throughout history. That happens. So we understand that. The thing that makes this especially painful is that it's confusing because that person's still alive and we're still alive.
Yep.
So that confusing aspect of we are dead to each other, but we are still alive in the world is really rubbing salt into the wound. There are a few different approaches you can take. One of them, which I've personally found really helpful, is mentally putting those people in the same kind of category as the people I've lost in death.
Mm-hmm.
And by categorizing them that way, when someone literally physically dies, for most of us, there's really no thought of, well, am I going to speak to them again? Am I going to see them again? Am I going to, have them round for a cup of tea next week? Or like, it's just not an option. And so because that's not an option, we stop thinking about it and it stops causing us issues. And we may still miss that person from time to time, but because we've not got that open loop going on, which I'll talk about in a second, we're able to make peace with it a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And so by mentally categorizing the people we've lost in the organization as saying, okay, that's over, that relationship has ended. Now, because they are still alive, we're not cutting off from the idea that sometime in the future, a new relationship might begin. But the fact is that, let's say in 10 years' time, my siblings, for instance, leave the organization. And maybe we've not spoken for 10, 15 years. So by that point, if we make contact, then although we have shared experiences, I'm not the same person and they aren't the same people either.
Yeah.
And so like literally physically and also just mentally and emotionally, we are different people. And so if a relationship starts then, that's a new relationship anyway. And so by sectioning it off that way, maybe it's just a little game of mental judo, but it seems to work by sectioning off the past and saying, well, that relationship is over as if an actual death occurred.
Yeah.
That then frees you up and it takes off the pressure, because then you're saying, well, this is, you know, I've drawn a line in the sand here and I've decided to leave that behind me. And that comes back to the theme of you taking back control. One of the other things, as well as the confusion that makes it so painful, is that it feels completely out of our control. The decision was made for us. And, you know, they can try and gaslight us and make out that we decided and chose that for ourselves. That's not really true. We didn't have any other choice. So by taking this stance, you're making the choice your own to say, okay, I'm moving on from this. I'm letting go of that. And then you can go through the same grieving process that you would do for a bereavement, say. You can give yourself that closure and move into the future still. And then if they circle back round and end up in your life later on, happy days, you know, that's a pleasant surprise. But if not, then you aren't left with that constant yearning, that constant expectation, because you've given yourself the closure that they frankly won't give you.
Cool.
I hope that answers the question.
Just adding a little bit extra on there. If we still struggle, though, after putting those things into place, is there other things we can do?
Sure, yeah. So another important thing which I already mentioned is allowing your own emotions and not judging them. Another thing that causes a lot of friction for us and makes us struggle and suffer a lot more than we need to is judging our emotions and making them wrong. And so then on top of feeling grief or sadness or anger, we're also feeling this judgment and this self-righteousness towards that feeling. And we're also feeling judged because we're judging ourselves, right? So you have this cluster situation, which is no good to anyone. So by learning to allow your own emotions and actually sit with them without judging them as wrong, without feeling like they're betraying us or doing us harm, and just sitting with them and allowing yourself to do that. And a good way to do this is to actually put time in your diary to do it, or your calendar, depending where you are. Allow yourself an hour a day if you need to actually sit with that problem and grieve it and cry and rage and be angry and do whatever you need to do. Allow yourself an hour a day of just pure focused processing time. And what's interesting is if you do that for a week or 2 weeks, eventually an hour is going to feel pretty long. And that storm's going to blow itself out. Eventually you might need 30 minutes, or you'll find you're done in like 5 minutes eventually. And then eventually you're like, look, I've circled through this many times. I've thought through it. I've felt through all the different angles. You know, I'm ready to put this behind.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it can be quite a struggle, can't it? So after going through the chunks size things, breaking them down into that sort of size, what can we then next do? So we got on top of a lot of it and we're able to move forward a little bit.
Yeah.
What next?
Well, it's what do you want? That's
so you're talking about us asking that question?
Yeah.
To ourselves?
Okay. Yeah. So Yeah, I wasn't just asking you that. What do you
No,
want?
that's right. What do I want? Well,
Drag me on this call. No. So, yeah, it becomes, what do we want? Here's something funny I noticed in my own self, in my own journey, is that I pride myself on being able to solve problems pretty well. That's why I do the work I do. I enjoy it. The problem is, if you identify yourself as a problem solver, you are defined by the fact that problems exist in your life. That's kind of a given, but it's kind of negatively focused. It's like, right, what am I working through now? What trauma am I going into unpacking now? What wound am I going to go and excavate now? And it's fine, and it's great to have that skill set. But at some point, we also have to start creating. And I believe you can learn a lot from the cycles in nature. So what happens when, let's say there's a forest fire that burns out all the dead wood. So we've experienced that, right? There's a lot of dead wood, metaphorically, to be burnt away. The longer the forest goes without that clear out, the more intense, the more destructive the heat is. So that's an obvious correlation. So we have a lot to burn through. But then what happens? There's a chance for new life to grow. And so the question then becomes for us, as we're making progress in healing, in recovering, in claiming back our own minds, our own environment, our own time as being our own sovereign territory, what do we want to do with that? And what's going to make you happy? What makes you feel good when you imagine doing it, when you imagine experiencing it or creating it or organizing it, whatever? What makes you feel good? And you don't have to find some huge life purpose straight away. But again, just that incremental thing of, well, it would feel really good to volunteer at this thing in town. There's a little soup kitchen thing. I think it'd feel nice to help some people. So I'll do that. Whatever it happens to be, but giving yourself some forward momentum and finding what's meaningful to you. And if you don't know straight away, like, I'm going to plot the rest of my life and be a career artist, and I'm going to have this amazing future doing that one thing. If you put pressure on yourself to do that, just like trying to solve all the problems at one go, if you try and figure out your whole future in one go, that can be overwhelming too. Throw you back into an unregulated emotional state. So give yourself permission again to explore, to try different things, see what you enjoy, see what you find meaningful, and develop your own tastes, and treat it as an adventure.
Yeah. Now, just before we go on, just go back to grief for a minute, because we've had a point come in. Being shunned, what can you do? Change what you can change and think different about what cannot change.
Yeah.
That would be true, wouldn't it?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, it's very Stoic philosophy. Stoic philosophy is definitely worth having a look at. People like Marcus Aurelius, or there are tons of books on the subject lately. It's very fashionable. But this idea of using the control you do have to change what you can change and to accept what you can't change, really valuable. A mentor of mine has the expression of, if a problem has no solution, then it's not a problem anymore. It's just the environment.
That's a good little phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the weather, you can't change it, but you can work around it.
Are you sure? I'm sure somebody just turns the tap on.
Well,
that's what I say.
And it's very temperamental over here at the moment, so I won't speak badly of the weatherman, just in case.
I won't make any comment on that. I've heard your summers are very short, lots of rain. But that's getting off the subject. Mind you, it could have something to do with our mental health if we're stuck in gloomy weather, couldn't it?
It can do, yeah. So a very important thing that we develop as we go through therapeutic change is you're building what we call an internal locus of control. So what that means is that as we go through life, instead of feeling like life's happening to us, we see it as either neutral or responding to us. So by taking that responsibility, then that's what makes a difference between someone who looks outside and says, God, it's a miserable day, the sky's grey, this is England, and I'm just gonna sit and drink tea, eat toast with brown stuff smeared on it, watch Coronation Street and feel miserable. Like that's
Great.
there's those people. And
Yep.
then there's the, oh, right, okay, today's an indoors day. Cool. What am I gonna do? It's that tiny shift where it's a more creative and a more empowered way of looking at things, because you're viewing yourself as being in control of what you're in control of, which you are if you choose to be.
Is that the same sort of thing that's going on with the COVID epidemics and the lockdowns that we've had to deal with in the last 18 months? It's very similar, or?
Yeah, it's common, because here's the thing, it all comes under the umbrella of human experience. And so that being the case, human nature will play itself out anyway. So many people have struggled with their mental health as a result of all of this stuff, the lockdown, being trapped at home, uncertainty around work, uncertainty around health and well-being, a lot of fear. Understandably enough, right? That's not against anyone. But also there are people who, despite the exact same environmental situations, they've had the best years that they've had in their lives so far. They've built amazing relationships. They've built businesses. They've built huge opportunities. And so the fact that that has happened lets you know that it is possible for that to happen. And so just because, okay, the world's in disarray and there are all these, things being bandied around, just because it's happening around us doesn't mean it's happening to us. And just because something, if there's outrageous stuff and fear on the news, say, or people around you are speaking in such a way, you're not obligated to take that on as your own. And we feel like we are, like, culturally, that's how culture works, is we have this shared experience and we have this kind of shared consciousness. And we if we're good citizens, we care about the same things as the other citizens around us. And fair enough. But you are allowed to draw a line and say, do you know what? Not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yep.
Like that's none of my business.
Yep. So taking it from that particular, like the weather and things like that, the environment we live, the environment that we can sometimes find ourselves as former members of a high control group, where we're sitting in our houses and thinking and then overthinking, that's sort of doing the same sort of thing to our mental health, isn't it?
Yeah. We are re-traumatizing ourselves.
So what are some of the steps to help us get away from that re-traumatizing?
I made a diagram that I shared in I think on my Facebook page recently. I'll send it to you later.
Sure.
But there are a few different things we can do. This self-sabotage cycle, I call it the unholy trinity of self-sabotage, just because it felt a bit naughty to use the word trinity, so I wanted to. And the first thing that happens is we go through a traumatic experience, an impact point that shakes us, knocks us, causes us to be unsettled, understandably enough. Then what happens is, from that place, we then make some decisions. We form some beliefs about who we are, what we are worthy of, what we're capable of, and how the world outside should respond to us. We form those beliefs.
Yep.
Then those beliefs become the fertilizer, if you like, out of which our behavior and our actions grows. So the example I gave in the diagram was, let's say we get abandoned by everyone we know and love. Many of us have been through that. That's an impact point. From that, we can form the beliefs like, people just abandon me. I'm not safe to be who I really am. I'm not safe to be honest in case people judge me and shun me for no reason. From those beliefs spawns behaviors like being a social chameleon, never showing our authentic selves and just showing people what they want to see. And then, the relationship's pretty shallow and it's short-lived. Or we're so anxious about being abandoned that we're overly possessive and clingy towards another person, end up driving them away. But what does that do? That behavior has then created an outcome that reaffirms that original trauma of, hey, people are going to abandon you. And so then that doubles down on that and strengthens those beliefs. So you end up in this cycle. What you can do is you can begin to, again, this is a big thing, but I'm nutshelling it down as small as I can. Developing support systems around you, like groups like this, like lives like this, having people who you can talk to about your experience and externalize it is really important. If you don't have people like that, I know you do if you're watching this, because you know, here we are. But if you feel unable to reach out to other people, again, having a notebook or a journal that you can just write it down in. By putting these thoughts, putting these struggles outside of yourself and into a conversation or onto paper, you're taking your subjective reality and you are objectifying it. So you're creating some objectivity there, where instead of it feeling like a situation you're immersed in, you're becoming on top of it. You're becoming the author of it. And as simple, again, as that sounds, neurologically speaking, you're changing the way that your internal perspective is processing that experience, which changes the way you feel about it. So having a support system in place is really important. And with the advent of social media and groups like this, it's possible now. It's an option, and it's a much more achievable option than it was, say, 40 years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
On top of that, that's like the safety net is how I'd describe it. And in itself, that can solve many problems. On top of that is doing what we said before. So instead of being overwhelmed by everything, and listen to your own language, when we're feeling overwhelmed, the words we're using tend to be pretty overwhelming. Like, everything is getting me down. It feels like the whole world's against me. I feel crushed. Like, our language becomes very loaded. And as we use that language, again, that in itself overwhelms us. So giving yourself the chance to take stock, to take inventory and say, well, what specifically? And make like a laundry list. So what specifically? Everyone hates me. Well, who specifically? Because you've not met everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, who specifically? So, everyone in the organization. Do they hate you? That's like 7 million people or so. So, well, the people in my congregation, like, do they all hate you though? Or like, some of them might. How many of them are actually just following orders and being kind of spineless? Most of them. Okay, so 2 people don't like you, maybe. Do they hate you, or do they just dislike you? Well, they looked at me funny once at the memorial. I held the wine a bit too long and they didn't like it. And so, okay, do you care about their opinions? Like, those 2 people, are they people you would like to emulate? Would you give those people trust over your finances, or would you ask their advice on your relationship, say? No. Okay, so we've gone from it feels like the whole world is against me, everyone hates me, to 2 people I don't like me back. So by getting specific and giving yourself that time to just say, okay, specifically then, who, what, how, and from then, as you have your support system in place, you then have this kind of list in place of what specifically needs to be worked on. And then you can begin asking the question of how. So you say, well, needless to say, I want to get beyond this because I can't spend the rest of my life in emotional submission to this organization that doesn't give a crap about me. So then the question becomes how. And you can take each one of those questions, or excuse me, one of those challenges, and start researching. You can reach out to people in your support network who know things, or you can use Google. And the chances are that any challenge you need to overcome is a challenge that someone else has probably overcome and wrote a book about.
Yeah.
So it's not just sitting and waving magic wands. It's a long-term project, but it's possible, it's doable, it's achievable. And when we have that in mind, rather than it being a question of, oh, if I ever overcome this, if I recover, if I'm able to, it's like, well, it's not if, it's how.
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm done.
That's fine. Let's change it. Let's change your soapbox a little bit. So you're basically saying we're allowed to do research on this sort of thing. We don't have to sit there and do what we've been told for years and years and years to go to the elders, who, by the way, have never been trained in any way, shape or form.
Exactly right. So that's that trained dependency thing. And the difference between this is that you're allowed to choose your own sources. You're allowed to choose people who you resonate with, people who you enjoy, who you trust because they are actually trustworthy, rather than just because they've got a label that's been assigned to them by someone else who you don't necessarily know. So there's nothing wrong with looking outside ourselves for resources, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Why would you?
Exactly.
But it's about finding what works. And if you're trying something and if it's not working out for you, knowing you have permission to change it. We were trained against that in the organization, because if we were banging our heads against a brick wall, it was like, well, you keep doing that and leave it in Jehovah's hands,
Of course.
You just keep smashing away. And now that we haven't got someone forcing us to do that, now we have the choice to say, actually, this sucks. I'm going to either go away and I'm going to get a bulldozer, or I'm going to walk along and find the door and kind of walk through that instead. So if something isn't working, we have permission to change it and try something else. And then if that only works 50%, we can go and find something else that works the other 50%,
Absolutely. We don't have to sit on that nail.
No.
We can get off the nail and we can relieve some of the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, there are lots and lots of things we can do. Okay, so we've looked at some further things with regards to working on the chunks, taking the steps to ask questions, and, like you said, get specific. Is there anything else we can do?
So as well as chunking it down, as well as getting really specific and getting creative and proactive in going after it, like those are all pretty high level things. When you combine that with being fascinated with the question of how, it's very tempting, right, to get sucked into the question of why.
Yeah.
Why was I treated that way? And why did I go through those things? You can ask that in an empowered way. Usually, though, if that's your starting point, the answers we tend to give, because who are we asking that question to? We're asking ourselves.
Yes.
Well, we have been indoctrinated and trained into a state of low self-esteem and thinking poorly about ourselves. So what kind of answer are we going to give? Why did everyone treat me so badly? Because you're a piece of crap. See, look at all the evidence of that. Like, so the answer of why, and that cycle begins again. The answer to the question of why doesn't tend to be that empowering, especially at the beginning.
So get the eraser out and go, get rid of why.
Yeah, just like, leave that for now. You can have it back later. For now, figuring out what's wrong, and then how can you solve it, and then what do you want, what's actually going to be nice for you, and how can you go for that. Those are some very simple terms you can begin to take action. Now, obviously, there are many layers to this.
Yeah.
But on a fractal level, so the overview of your life and in small scale projects as well. That kind of approach gives you that forward momentum, and you're able to say, okay, here's the timeline of my life. Here's where I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if my camera's reversed, but yeah, let's do it this way. So here's the past. Here's the past, and here's all the stuff that's from there.
Yep.
Here are the different holds that they've held over me. Here's my future. Wherever it is, there's my future. And those are all the things I'm working towards, or those are the things I'm anxious about. And then here's what I can do to actually address that, to overcome those challenges, to feel like I'm back in the driving seat of my own life, in my own mind. And then here's how I can step by step begin to make that happen.
Cool. Well, I think for this live stream, can we end it there? And when we get back to you in a couple of months' time, let's look at those questions you just asked and enlarge and spend our time on that. Would that be okay with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the meantime, if you want, because sometimes coaching ourselves is difficult.
Definitely.
Like, taking that external perspective is difficult. So sometimes it's helpful to make a framework for ourselves. So I put together a workbook, actually, a free workbook, it's free to access, that actually walks you through the process. I think you have it, Shane. That walks you through the process of actually coaching yourself and setting goals for the future, identifying the different areas of life where you want to make progress, and then developing a strategy to actually make that happen. Yep. So if you would like access to that, just send me a message, and we can make it happen.
Yeah, because we'll make sure that's available, because we're not here to be by you. You don't need to be by yourself.
Exactly.
There's so many resources out there for those who are listening on the live stream now, those who will stumble over it later. You don't have to struggle by yourself. We want everybody's mental health as best as possible to be good. I know there's other circumstances that our mental health can get on top of us. What would you say to somebody who's going through that in conclusion, that the mental health, they are really struggling? What would you say, Jonah?
I'd say you're not broken, and you're not alone, and you're not wrong, and you can get past this. And sometimes just knowing that is the biggest chunk we're capable of. Maybe we're not capable of taking action and journaling and writing all stuff out and phoning people. Maybe that's beyond us because we're just stretched too thin. And if that's the case, that's fine. You're not wrong for that. But just having that knowledge that, look, you're not broken. It is possible to get through this. And just be brave, be courageous enough to weather this storm and come out the other side of it. And that's all you have to do. Don't put any extra pressure on yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say thank you for coming on. It's been a joy to have you on, giving us some practical things that we can do. And when we come back, and the next time we have you on, we'll look at those questions and enlarge a little bit more on them so we can get a bit more specific.
Brilliant. I look forward to it.
So for those on our live stream, thank you for being here. We hope you've enjoyed it. And for those who might catch this, please reach out. The contact details are in the description. If you would like that publication, that little workbook that Jonah was talking about, message. We can make sure you get that. In the meantime, for those who are everywhere around the world, we hope you are safe. We hope you are keeping warm or cool, whichever the situation may be. And until then, we look forward to seeing you again. Keep smiling. And we look forward to catching up once again on our next live stream. Till then, we'll catch you later. Bye.